So, hi everyone, welcome to the Nostalgic Dragon books, where I today have the honor of having author C Esslemont, who has written many Malazan books. He's a co-creator with Stephen Erickson in the Malazan world, and we will talk about he will talk about his writing and his books, and I will ask questions. And some of the questions that I will ask are questions that you viewers have sent to me. So welcome, C Esslemont.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And for me, as my viewers know, and also Stephen Erickson, when I met him, Malazan is a great inspiration for me as a reader. I started to read Malazan Book of the Fallen actually 5 years ago when we moved into this house where I'm sitting now. I was so eager to get it, so I couldn't wait for the book, so I bought it on on Kindle or the equivalent to Kindle. I started to read Gardens of the Moon, and I was hooked. And then I read other stuff as well, a lot of mythology and a lot of other fantasy, of course. But Malazan has a very special place in my heart, and I'm reading right now your book, The Return of the Crimson Guard. You will be able to talk more about your books. I really enjoy these books. There is a review on your Knight of Knives here on the channel. So today we're going to listen to you and your role in the Malazan world. So the first question I have is, because when you read at the backside, maybe not on this one, of course, but on other books, or if you search on Google, you get up Malazan, of course, Malazan Universe or Malazan World, and then Stephen Erickson, and then your name, and it's described as you being the co-creator and author of many books. So I would like to listen to you about your role in creating the Malazan world, and maybe a little bit about your background as well.
Certainly. Steve and I met on an archaeological dig in Canada, and we found that we both had a passion for fantasy literature, science fiction, and just classical literature in general. And we both wanted to be writers. It was sort of our secret hope that we could make it happen. And I happened to have been gaming for some time before then, like through high school and up into university. And he hadn't come across it. So I introduced him to RPGs, tabletop gaming like Dungeons and Dragons and other systems. And so we together used that platform to generate a fantasy world. Like, we found we needed geography, we needed races, we needed characters. And so piece by piece, the world was built as we needed it for each campaign.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, and Stephen talked about it too. But as I understand it, because I'm a RPG guy myself when I was younger, role-playing a lot, I understood it was only you two who played the role-playing games, or were you more people?
Often, for the most part, like for many years, we were roommates. So we lodged together and we just gamed all night, like every night, the two of us. But Steve also ran a party in Winnipeg. He had people who he gamed with, and I joined in when I was in Winnipeg. And then in Victoria as well. But yes, like mostly because we were rooming together almost every evening, we built something in the world.
Yeah, amazing. When did it occur to you that you were in the Malazan world? If you know, if you so to speak, because when I played role-playing games with or Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, we maybe didn't have a world. We just had a fantasy world. So when did you get the idea? This is the Malazan world we are role playing in.
Hmm. Hmm. As the sphere of sort of that we were creating grew, and like it started very small, a small region, like the island itself, Malaz, and then the continent, and then that was explored. And as it grew, we realized that actually we had a whole sort of world here, and everything that we then tried to build, we consciously wanted it all to work together, to sort of knit together and make sense. We tried, and of course there are some places where maybe, oh, it didn't quite fit, but there's the two of us, so sometimes we don't quite entirely overlap his vision and mine. It's interesting. Maybe it's because I'm left-handed and he's right-handed, and so sometimes I'll put things on the left that he would put on the right, and things like.
Yeah, interesting. When did you get the idea of I would like to ask you, because some viewers know about you and they know about Steven Erikson and the Malazan world a lot. Some viewers don't know about it. Could you just start to tell me about your books, if you can just summarize what what you have written, right?
um Well, when Steve and I sort of went our separate ways, he went off to do grad school one place and I went in a different place. We divided our narratives up, and we made a list of what we would like to write about if we had a choice in the world. And he had his list and I had mine, and there were actually few conflicts on those lists. So we divided things up. And I found that I was writing more about the empire itself, its growth, and its enemies like Isengard. And so I was circling around that a lot more than I think Steve was. And he sort of was moving to other continents a lot. And so while it's about the Malazan world and the Malazan Empire, that's sort of the way you might talk about a period. Like historians use the term the Victorian era, and they're just using that as a shorthand because that's a major power at the time. And you could talk about the Roman era and in the same sense. And so that's what I'm writing about, is that era.
Yeah, and that's an impression I get, and I really appreciate that you cover different both geographical places and also, I would say, different themes and also different characters. So I really think it's very, very rewarding to read your books because of that. One thing that I should just show the viewers some books so they have seen. This is the Dance's Lament, Path of the Ascendancy, right?
Yes.
And
Book one.
oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry. So did you want me to talk about
Now
that
you can say
particular
something if
book,
you
or
want to the book as well.
I was very pleased by this cover, I have to say. I think it really works well. And I was very nervous tackling this because in the people were talking about a prequel, and I don't like that. It's not a prequel. I think that term diminishes any project that tackles the backstory, because I think it can stand just as importantly and centrally as the later stories. After all, history doesn't just start and stop. It has its own history, and it continues on into the future.
Yeah, so that's Lament, and then I have all of your books actually, but so I have a lot to read. But here is I really like this cover actually. I haven't read this book yet. This is Blood and Bone, so it's later. Is it something you
Blood
can?
and Bone. Well, from what you've been saying, I think you might enjoy this one in particular. It's very, a lot of readers have said it's very atmospheric, and I hope so. And I think the cover sort of gives you some of that.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's a Malazan is a world you can. I think I read Tolkien a lot, like many people have done. I think I was in that world for 2 decades, I suppose. So I suppose I can be in Malazan for maybe 2 decades as well, because there's a lot to discover here. We can talk about your um, actually, we can talk a bit about your writing style already, because since you mentioned atmospheric, that's one thing I really appreciate with your books. Many things, but you are very skilled in describing the environment, nature, magic, how the city feels, emotions, feelings, from my perspective, and also things that are maybe a bit difficult to grasp in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I suppose it is intended to be that way, but it's everything from Deck of the Dragons to Warrens. I think in your books I get a feeling how it feels or how they work. So what is your writing style, and how does it, do you think, differ to Steven Eriksson's writing style, and what do you add to the Malazan world with your writing?
Yes. Well, I think personally, I think Stephen's writing is very atmospheric, but not to take anything away from
No, no,
Steve.
no. Both you are both
Uh,
good, so obviously.
his style is his, and mine is mine, of course. And sometimes it's hard, he had, I think, 3 or 4 novels published before Knives appeared, and if not more. I can't quite remember the sequence of publication.
Mm.
So it was difficult to sort of let the readers know that here was this new voice coming into a world that they've already grown to know. But eventually, I think people sort of realized that, well, this is a different author. And so, of course, a different author is going to have a different voice, and should have a different voice. So um, I think because of my influence and preferences, um, I could say my earlier books were more direct and more action driven in the plot driven, and more a fast pace, if you will. Um, so there are a lot of different techniques in that sense that I would be using more than Steve does, um, and but now I think I'm slowing down a bit. I think I'm willing to take my time more. So maybe some readers will enjoy that more, and some won't. And after all, each reader has their preference.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are distinct styles, but some things are also similar. One thing I have a question about is the aspect of lore. I don't know if it's my feeling, but I think I get an added understanding of the Malazan lore when I read your books. Now, I mean, there are so much information in the Malazan book, so maybe I've missed something in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, of course. But when I read it, like there is I think, good description of Deck of Dragons. Don't want to spoil for other readers, but I don't think that's a spoiler. In The Return of the Crimson Guard, for example, there are descriptions about warrens, for example, or questions about warrens that characters have. What is a warren? Was that intentional for you to write in that way?
Um, I don't know. Maybe so. Maybe I felt, well, to be use sort of reviewers' shorthand. Uh, Maybe I was willing to take the reader's hand a bit more and sort of lead them along. Um, I'm just was more worried about leaving them behind, and perhaps that's why I felt that I should explain a little bit more. And for some readers, it was too much. You know, they thought I was explaining things too much, and I shouldn't bother with that and just steam on ahead. But there are other readers who are more patient, let's say, and willing to explore things and stop and think about the events and what's going on. The Deck of Dragons, I sort of created that for the world, and when we were I forget if it goes back as far as the gaming or not. I don't think so. Um, but I haven't really made it central. It's more we wanted to show a world that is where magic is pervasive, where people still live in a sort of a spiritual a world animated by a spiritualist view of existence. And so everything possesses that in the view of the people living, sort of a monotheistic world, and try to show what that worldview is like.
I really appreciate that. One of the perspectives of this channel, not so much for this interview, but or conversation, is that I have a spiritual perspective on my reading. That's why I have been interested in mythology, like Hindu mythology, but that's because of my roots. I read a lot of Christian mythology as well, if you call it that, and Asian mythology from East Asia, for example. So that's, I think, was one of the attractions for me when I read Malazan, because it had this spiritual vibe, because you can really feel that atmosphere. And when it comes to Deck of Dragons, uh, I said that to Stephen as well, but it reminds me of a TV show. I don't know if you know about that, but it's called Carnivale or Carnivale. It's HBO, and there is a tarot deck in the main story. So I got this, also very spiritual. I could say. I don't know if you know about the show, actually.
No, I don't think I know it. I
Carnivale.
might have heard it.
Yeah, check it
Uh,
out on YouTube or something. You can see the intro, and there is a lot of, I think, Malazan-esque, Malazan vibes to the intro. Even if that's about the depression in the United States, so it's a different era, but it's
hmm.
something there with the houses and everything, with the cards. Um, yeah, I also have. Yeah, you told me about before we started to record. You told me about geography, that you named a lot of things, cities and things like that. And there is a reader question actually here about both the names, character names, but also geographical names. There are so many names in the Malazan world. How do you come up? Where is your inspiration to all the names, and how can you come up with so many names?
Hmm. Um, Well, when we were filling out the world, the geography, Steve is a much better artist than I am, so he did most of the drawing of the maps. Um, and then, so he did the most of that. I did some. And then we had to fill in the blanks. And so I'm not claiming to have done more than he did. We divided it up, and he filled in some of the continents, and I filled in others of the continents. And this is all based, back then, this was based on our gaming needs. And for example, I wanted to um, do something in off continent. So I went down to Stratum and filled in that area and gave some geography for that. And he did the same in northern Guinea-Bissau. And so we really divided up the chore. And when I was using names, I tried to, and Steve too, we tried to be consistent. So, for example, culturally, often there are a lot of similarities in language, in naming cities or rivers or regions, and so we tried to do that as well when we were making up particular areas. And so one particular tribe would have their names for something, but then the neighbors would have their own names for those same things, different names. And so we were trying to show that depth of cultural interplay as well. And when you're world building, often a nice place to do is to go look at birth names of other cultures and look at lists of names and get a feel for the flavor of, say, Turkish names or Russian or Malaysian, and just use that as sort of a model for an area, maybe, so there's an internal consistency. You know?
Yeah, that's very interesting. The dramatis personae is always large. Even I noticed that in the Return of the Crimson Guard, it's very long, a lot of names and people. But if you look at Dan Esslemont's dramatis personae, it's much more limited. So that's an interesting, I think, reflection. I have also another question from one of my viewers. And it's many people who watch my channel, they are also writing themselves and want to write fantasy or maybe publish one day and so on. So one question is about your literary technique or style. What do you do to attract the reader? Do you use like metaphor, simile, irony, humor? Can you elaborate a bit upon your style?
Mm.
Mm.
Well, of course, both Steve and I have trained in creative writing. We have degrees in creative writing. And so when you do that, you are taught these basic literary techniques, like the use of metaphor and and simile and what is an allegory and what is not, and things like that. And then ideally, it should all be internalized, and it should all just be instinctual after that. These are your tools, and you should know how to use them, and use them when they're needed. So I don't think it's deliberate. I'm not out saying, well, let's put a metaphor in here. It just, I see a need for it, and so that's where it would go. Um, and for involving the reader, it's all about emotions, I think. Really, you have to touch the reader somehow. You can make the reader furious with the character, or you can make the reader feel sympathetic for the character's plight. Um, and the best ways to do that is to try and connect with emotionally, make the reader connect emotionally. And all these tools help with that by bringing the reader closer to the mindset of the particular character we're with at that moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I write myself, but I don't write fantasy. I sometimes do, but I write poems. So but there are poems usually in the beginning of the chapters in all Malazan books. Maybe not poems, but it could be historical accounts. Sometimes it's poems and things like that. So I think was that an intentional? What was the idea of having this? You could say prologue to the chapter with a historical account or a poem or some philosophical reflection and so on.
Right. Steve sort of set that out in his books, and we just originally decided to use them to try and further deepen the history and show that there are all these other writers in the world who have looked at this history and tried to evaluate it. And this is our version of that history. And these paragraphs, epigrams are taken from these other sort of imaginary volumes that exist somewhere in the world. And the poetry, Steve, I think, is a much better poet than I am, so I don't even try to put in poems, but I'll put in short sayings and epigrams and aphorisms that are drawn out of the world to try and give a hint of its flavor and its ethos.
Yeah, it's very nice to read that. When you settle down, when you come home from work, for me at least, and you start reading, you can read the paragraph before the chapter. It's the way to settle down, I think, for me as a reader. One question I have is about your inspiration for your books, because also if you Google Malazan, you quite quickly come across the Black Company, different books, military fantasy books, and so on. I'm not sure if that mostly refers to the Malazan Book of the Fallen or also to your books, but it doesn't matter because I'm interested what books have inspired you in your writing, or stories or mythology or
Mhm.
anything like that.
Yes, well, of course, both Steve and I were madly reading and consuming fantasy literature. And I think anyone who wants to write in the genre has to know it backwards and forwards. But of course, when I was young, I was inspired by the usual YA versions of classics like Robinson Crusoe and um, and for me anyway, here in North America, Jack London, Tales of the North, and here I am in the North, but and Dumas, and as we've talked about in other interviews, there was a lot of Three Musketeers in
Yeah, right.
some of the early books, and that's another inspiration. So we were both widely read, not only in fantasy but also in the classics, and more directly, as you said, Glenn Cook showed that with the Black Company books, you could bring, like George R. R. Martin, bring gritty, real politics into a setting that people weren't traditionally viewing as containing that, and bring grit and realism to fantasy. And we were really inspired by that.
Yeah, I think that's a one of the rewarding things for me with Malazan. I read other things as well, as people on the channel know, but I mostly read Malazan. So to avoid, like I'm being in some kind of cult, I try to read other stuff as well, and then but I usually come back to Malazan because I think I don't know, but it has a kind of contemporary commentary. Maybe it's not deliberate, but when I read the news today, we have all the things in Europe with Ukraine and NATO. You don't need to comment on that, of course, but sometimes when I read Malazan, I think both your books and Stephen's books as well, I think I can get some understanding about the real world without pinpointing anything particular in world politics.
Mm.
That's a
Well,
reflection
that
I
would be
have.
really something. I would really appreciate that point. That's very nice.
Yeah, and I think one perspective of that is that both your books and Stevens has learned me to understand things better because you describe different characters' perspectives and you switch back and forth. So that's one thing I learned a lot about myself and also the world, and that's one of the reasons I keep coming back to the books. One question that another viewer has is maybe we can combine them. There are two questions, but first of all, if it was difficult or is difficult to write books outside the Malazan Book of the Fallen, are there any challenges doing that? And then if there are side characters, I mean separate characters outside the Malazan Book of the Fallen that you would like to explore more, or how do you view on that?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I've been trying to do projects outside of the Malazan books, and I find it very difficult because, of course, I just feel so comfortable in what we've created, Steve and I, and so I can just dive right in, and it's much easier for me. But to write science fiction, which I enjoy very much as well, and I'm trying to write in that, and I'm finding it difficult to try, heavy lifting from the ground up,
Yeah.
trying to establish. That's tough. So it's been a while. Um, and these characters, they're science fiction. It's a sort of a near future. Um, And the problem with that, though, is that the future keeps catching up and changing, and so it feels out of date even within a month. And so I'm wondering, I'm reconsidering. Now I know why so much science fiction is distant future. It's because the contemporary world just keeps messing up your what's going to happen. It changes so fast.
When you say science fiction, I'm just curious because I've started to read some science fiction. I haven't read it before actually so much, mostly fantasy and mythology and religious texts as well. But yeah, I've read Dune, of course, and now I'm reading a young author, Christopher Rucchio, Sun Eater series. But when I read Dune, we can take Dune, for example, I get the sense that the difference to fantasy is not so big because there seems to be similarities in world building and many things. And when I read about
Oh,
the Malazan Warrens, of course, I have when I've read Dune and other books, it feels a bit sci-fi concept. Also, the Warren and warps, some of course.
yeah, Dune was a big inspiration as well, of course. It's unavoidable, and we both Steve and I loved it, and still do. And you're right. There's a lot of interesting overlap there because what is he dealing with? He's dealing so much with religion and spiritualism, and the mind and how human mind works, and the way the human mind interprets the world. And of course, we're doing that in our fantasy, and then also we're doing a sort of kind of world travel, as you said, but when you move into a warren. Um, I interpreted them more as an actual physical locale, I
Mm.
think. That's why I think my take on it is different than Steve's. I think Steve sees it more as an internal landscape, but I took it more to be actual, real physical places that existed prior to the opening of that warren. And what happened is you just reach something, you break through a barrier to something that's already been there and has its own history. And then if you're lucky, you can escape and back to where you started.
Yeah, and I read just before we started to record here, and then we met. So I read a chapter in the Crimson Guard where one person asks about the Warrens, and the person who answers says, yeah, think about it like, I think tribes or clans or previous groups, something like that. So something you can touch upon and relate to, maybe. I have the idea that my perception is that Steven Erikson's books are obviously very atmospheric too, as you said. I love them equally, both your writing styles, but I think they are more introspective so far. So I might be wrong, but so far I think Steven's books can be very introspective. The characters think a lot.
Yes, there is much more philosophical. I mean, we both are exploring it and we're exploring it in our own ways. Um, and when there's action that's needed and it's a violent time and we're showing a violent period, so there's a lot of action as well. And um, we're also looking at um, issues surrounding colonialism and imperialism and uh, cultural clash is a big concern that we're both looking at and thinking about in our books, the way cultures um, come together or fail to come together and misinterpret each other. And of course, that's our anthropology and coming through.
Yeah, yeah, they are highly. I think I really appreciate intellectual the books. I mean, the writing style and the content is on I think on a high level. So it's very rewarding as a reader. I think that's that's good because I think the books can last long for the readers too. I have another question for you, and that is more of your future plans for your writing. What's what's ahead? What can we expect as readers?
Yes, Steve and I both have a few more Malazan books in us. I think I've got at least two. I'm slowing down though, and as I'm aging and going on and thinking about other things. However, I am very much enjoying the current project that I'm working on. As I said, I think it's going to be a slower book, and some readers might not like that, but others will. So, you know, every project has its own flavor, and each book is slightly different. And I'm trying not to just do the same thing, you know, over and over again. And then there'll be another one, certainly. But after that, I think both of us might take some time away and try other projects. Like I said, I might try some science fiction, or we'll see. But I think it's been quite a run, and we're both interested in trying to finish up properly and not just keep, you know, just keep churning out. We want to try and end it on a deliberate note.
Yeah, that is sounds great for me and probably many viewers here as well. And I think that's very rewarding when I read the Malazan books, because they usually have I mean, there are no cliffhangers. So and that is a sign too that you can actually read one Malazan book and get a feel for the writing and the series and the universe. So I think that goes like a theme in all of your writing, that you accomplish. You start from A and you go to Z, you say, right? You finish what you've done. So I think that's good. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. Do you want to add something more? Because you can do that. We have time. Otherwise, I think I'm very happy with our conversation today.
No, I don't think I can think of anything add. I think that's a nice note to talk about future plans and near the end, and then, you know, looking ahead and what can we expect.
So thank you very much, Ian C. Esslemont. And for you viewers, if you haven't watched it, the review of Night of Knives is, I will put it in the comments below. And I also have videos on Malazan here on the channel. So if you haven't watched them, I encourage you to do so. And there will be more videos on Malazan concepts, especially, that I will elaborate a bit upon warrants and deck of dragons, like we talked about here today, and also houses, of course. So thank you so much for coming to the channel.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great to talk about all these issues and talk about things that are Malazan.